Hello there, fellow Potterheads. Welcome back to our channel. We're continuing with the next chapter of Backward with Purpose, Part 1, Always and Always by Dead Woodpecker. So, again, sit back, relax, play it clearly, and play it safe. This is Chapter 4, Christmas Cheer.
For the first time ever, Harry and Ron had packed the night before they left rather than putting it off until the next day. The long-standing tradition of running about madly and tossing whatever they could grasp into their overflowing trunks had been abolished. Feels weird, doesn't it? Ron asked. What? Getting it done with more than 5 minutes to spare? Ron laughed. That too. But I meant going home, to the burrow. I barely saw it before Mum was screeching at me to get ready. He smiled fondly, not all upset about it. I'd forgotten how loud she could get. They were in the room of requirement and had more time to speak to each other without Snape and Dumbledore wanting to discuss strategies and tactics, or Hermione wanting to discuss the Philosopher's Stone. They didn't begrudge either, but the 2 hours they had to completely relax stretched out before them like an early Christmas gift. Do you think it was stupid? Harry asked suddenly. To give that book to Hermione? They'd ordered a very rare copy of Memories Unbound as a gift for their friend, and Harry had second-guessed the decision, even though he'd been the one to think of it, ever since. Nah, I've told you before, Ron said lazily. She'll never believe it. You were right, mate. It sets the stage for when we tell her the truth. She'll think it's a load of rubbish. Harry nodded. She'll like the chocolate frogs, at least. And not all of it was something she'd never believe, said Ron. Some of it wasn't fairy tale stuff. It had an entire chapter on occlumency, even. Harry looked over at Ron. His already long legs stretched out toward the fire, and he had his arms behind his head. He looked completely relaxed, but Harry knew his best mate well, and thus knew the telltale signs of anxiety, the occasional scratching of his long nose, the way he tapped his foot. Nothing too obvious, but Harry knew. He also knew what bothered him. Harry was not the only one who knew Ron that well, and they were going to be in the company of his family. Just stay relaxed, Harry advised. Ginny's been able to do it all these months without any sort of problem. At least she hadn't mentioned it. It'd be just like Ginny to run into a spot of trouble the size of London and not see fit to tell them. Ron snorted. Like Ginny tell us. If it was something major, I'm sure she would, Harry murmured, despite the fact that he'd been thinking along the same lines as Ron. I can't wait to see her. She pointed out to me that we haven't been apart for this long since the burrow was destroyed. You'll see her in about 10 hours, Ron said absently. We'll have to find some way to get away from the burrow, just the three of us. Hopefully tonight, and several more times over Christmas. Isn't this the most maddening thing? Harry asked. We've spent so many years alone, without anyone, and now we're worried about getting away, just the three of us? Ron laughed. It's up there with one of the best feelings in the world. Ron, Harry said seriously after a while, you do think we're doing the right thing with the Philosopher's Stone? Letting it all play out the same way. Ron eyed him. You're having doubts? Harry was, but he had not told Ron of his misgivings. I'm afraid, he admitted. Then, when Ron looked shocked, he waved his hand abruptly. Not of all the obstacles, dolt. I'm worried about Voldemort. What if he tries to use legilimency on me? Snape's been training you in occlumency again, isn't he? Yeah, Harry admitted. I'm a bit better, but not by much, and I've got to be perfect before I meet him. Imagine if he found out everything. I got a lot of dangerous secrets, you know, and being from the future is just one of them. The Horcruxes, for one. He could easily hide them all again. We got the tiara, and the locket is fairly safe at Grimmauld Place. What about the cup? Ron said shrewdly. He can't exactly go break into Gringotts again. At least, he can't break into the Lestrange's vault. We did, Harry pointed out quietly. We did because Hermione impersonated Bellatrix, Ron replied. Plus, I'll bet he wouldn't think of the dragon. I'm still worried, Harry said stubbornly. It doesn't matter about the diary Horcrux. Tom Riddle can find out all he wants before I kill him again. And even if he finds out when he resurrects himself would not be the end of the world. But we've only destroyed one Horcrux, and I don't want to change everything too much. What if we can't find out way to victory? Keep up with the occlumency was the only comfort Ron seemed able to give. The first month or so at Hogwarts had been very emotional for Harry. Seeing everyone alive and well again, untainted by the darkness that was to come, had brought a lump to his throat and tears to his eyes many a time during the first weeks. It had taken several weeks for him to adjust to this reality, one in which Harry was once again a first year. He rather thought that his former 10-year-old self would be completely incapable of experiencing this rather mixed bouquet of emotions: fear, joy, celebration, and guilt. But he had a better handle on it now. His body and mind had adjusted to the differences and the miracles. Thus Harry was relieved to note that he was not in any danger of doing anything suspicious or embarrassing, such as bursting into tears, during the car ride home from the platform. Arthur Weasley, tall, thin, and balding, picked them up in the old Ford Anglia. After a quick introduction to Harry, and a stern refusal to make use of the car's invisibility booster and powers of flight, he led them out to the car. The rowdy Weasley boys made short work of hefting their trunks into the magically enhanced boot and piled into the back seat. Harry was not surprised to find that Percy claimed the front by right of the eldest son present. London was sodden and gray, but the atmosphere in the car was lively and loud. And then Penelope Clearwater, she's another prefect, said, Percy said from the front seat. But where does Lee expect we'll find it? No idea, George. He's off his rocker if he thinks Mum will let us go to Noctur Alley. How was your turn, boys? Arthur said, loudly after several minutes of this. Harry could see his eyes in the mirror, so he was certain the older man was talking to him and Ron. It was fun, Dad. I love Hogwarts, Ron said enthusiastically, even if it got to a bit of a rocky start. Arthur's eyes twinkled. Don't think your mother's forgotten about it, Ron. Speaking of the confuzzled draft, Arthur looked sternly at the twins. Your mother suspects that you two were the ones to give it to them. We didn't, George said immediately. Only because we didn't think of it, Fred said fairly. It was pretty brilliant. I wish I could have been there, George added, if only to see the expression on that old bat's face. George, Arthur warned. Sorry. George looked quite unabashed. Professor Oldbat. Even Arthur laughed, and Percy cracked a grin, although Harry noticed that the older boy tried to hide it. Harry decided to speak up. Percy helped us with our potions work after that, since Professor Snape was so angry. Yeah, Ron put in. If Percy hadn't given us those tips about the common ingredients and whatnot, me and Harry would have lost even more points for Gryffindor. Percy sat up straighter. Just doing my job, Ron. Prefects help the other students. Don't pretend that the fact that I'm your favorite brother had nothing to do with it, Ron teased. Harry laughed. It had been a plan of theirs to attempt to include Percy. When they'd first begun to scheme, Ron had been struck by an idea. It was summer, and the residents of the cottage overlooking the river had changed almost completely in the last few months. Creature was simply delighted and bustled around preparing meals that did not go completely unappreciated. Ron's appetite especially had returned with a vengeance. He moaned, chewing a bite of sandwich. The elf's cooking gets better by the day. We ought to give him another black family heirloom. Ginny looked exasperated but amused. Ron, if you can stop thinking about food for just 1 second, we got to talk about the family. Namely Percy. What about Percy? Ron asked. Apparently, he'd not been listening to the other two for the last 5 minutes. We don't want him to support the ministry again, Harry explained. We know he'll come back in the end, but, well, I don't know how to do that, but we could just treat him better, Ron said after taking another bite. We always treated him like the bastard of the family, except Mum and Dad. He was always pompous, yeah, but I regret a lot of the stuff we said over the years. Very insightful, Ron, Ginny smiled. It may not make a difference, but at least he'll know we love him, Ron said. Always and always. Thus Harry and Ron had gone to Percy every once in a while throughout their first term at Hogwarts. Not with anything big or earth-shattering, but they asked him a question here and there, which Percy responded to with a surprising degree of warmth. Despite the prior knowledge of the subject, his answers about potions and transfiguration, neither of which Ron or Harry was particularly skilled at, then or now, were helpful. Harry wondered about the changes they were making and felt reasonably confident that they were for the better. Percy's loss had been devastating, most especially to Ron and Ginny. They'd been angry with him for years when he'd chosen to stand with the ministry, even after Harry had been proven right. It was just barely after he had reunited with his family that Percy had been killed defending his mother from an attack from behind. Even if Percy chose to side with the Ministry again, Harry thought that he'd feel able to come back sooner. "What is the two of you so quiet?" Fred asked suddenly. Startled, Harry looked out the window and realized that dusk had fallen while he'd been lost in his thoughts. Ron moaned, "Thinking about Mom, and all the words she'll have for me about the confuzzled draft and the troll." George grinned evilly. "Better start getting your affairs in order. You're not like to live long once Mom gets her hands on you." "Your mother is very proud of you, Ron," Arthur interjected. "But she's a bit angry, yes." Percy swiveled around in his seat and grinned at Ron. "Better get started now. The burrow's only a kilometer away." Sure enough, they were driving past the small village of Ottery St. Catchpole, and Harry could see the orchard that marked the boundary of the land the burrow sat upon and hid their small Quidditch pitch from view. It was a beautiful sight, Harry thought. The sun was setting behind the mountains and made the snow that covered the ground and trees glow red, orange, and yellow. Soon enough, an even more beautiful sight came into view, the burrow. It was just as crooked, ramshackle, and beloved as ever. Harry got out of the car, retrieved his trunk, and gazed around. The old Wellington boots still guarded the back door. There was a clear path to the Quidditch pitch. Ginny obviously couldn't stop herself from flying, and little tracks in the snow that belonged to the many garden gnomes that lurked around the burrow because of Arthur's kind heart. "I expect Molly's got dinner ready," Arthur told his sons. "Be sure to take off your outer things in the hall. You know how your mother gets." "It's just snow," Fred and George complained in unison. "What's a little bit of water?" Arthur ignored them, but turned to smile kindly at Harry and squeezed Ron's shoulder affectionately. "Welcome to the burrow, Harry." They were lucky that Arthur Weasley had had the presence of mind to send his Patronus to his youngest son the night the Death Eaters attacked. Harry, Ron, and Hermione had been sitting in their tent, barely speaking. It had been a long year of hiding, and without any sort of sign of moving forward, they'd taken to snapping at each other. Not having any word from the outside world had not helped either. "Honestly, Ron, you shouldn't just expect me to do all the cleaning," Hermione said irritably. She was polishing her wand for what seemed like the 15th time in as many days. Ron was about to retort when they were astonished to see the unmistakable, misty form of Arthur's Patronus coalesce in front of him. "Burrow under attack," it said, and vanished. The three had never taken down the tent so quickly. It was packed within Hermione's beaded bag within a minute. They grasped hands and disapparated. For one moment, all Harry could do was look on in horror as what seemed like a dozen figures in black robes dueled with 5 red heads, including 2 witches. "Ginny!" He ran and started firing jinxes and hexes at any Death Eater he could, while careful not to hit any of the Weasleys. He took one down with Sectus Sempra. Later, he recognized the man as Yaxley. He didn't get up again. Harry later thought that he might have been the first man he killed. No time to worry, he charged forward. Ron was yelling, Hermione was shouting. The twins, grim-faced, dueled with 2 Death Eaters that Harry didn't recognize. "Nice night for it," George shouted as he hit his opponent with a particularly nasty jinx that caused black bile to come out of his eyes, ears, mouth, and nose. Harry shot a jinx at another man's back as he fought his way to Ginny's side. Her flaming hair swirled around her as she ducked, dodged, and dived, finally hitting her masked opponent with a powerful hex. He doubled over choking, while she looked for another fight. Her eyes fell on him. "Harry!" she shouted. It was a mistake. Heads swiveled in his direction. Mrs. Weasley, taking advantage of the inattention, stunned the hooded figure near her. Mr. Weasley was thrown into a wall and lay unmoving by a hard-faced man with thin black hair and an ugly smile. "Well, well," said Bellatrix Lestrange from behind him. "Little baby Potter came to save his fake family, did he? The Dark Lord always knows." Harry stunned her. It caught her by surprise, he noted coldly. She liked to toy with her victims, and they usually let her. Harry refused to let her distract him. He took a moment to bind her with ropes he conjured, and turned to fight again. He and Ginny stood back to back and dueled their hardest. They managed to avoid most of the curses, until the dark-haired man stepped up. Harry could see him out of the corner of his eye. He was looking at Ginny in such a way that made his blood boil with rage. His own opponent was weakening, but he wasn't finished yet. Crucio! The man yelled, and Harry was an instant too slow. Agony sliced through him, and he fell to the ground, writhing in pain. He heard someone screaming and knew it was himself. It seemed to last forever, but it stopped after long moments. He stood sluggishly on his feet and made little whimpering sounds that humiliated him even then. The dark-haired man was closing in on Ginny. She was getting tired, he realized in an instant. Her wand arm was not moving with the same rapid grace he'd become accustomed to. Turning, he sent another Sectum Sempra at the dark-haired Death Eater and saw a great gash slice open his chest before he felt the agony of the Cruciatus Curse once more. It lasted less than a minute this time, before Harry cracked open his eyes and saw one of the twins tear him apart. He stood, shakily, to his feet. It was a brief lull in the battle. Mrs. Weasley was helping Mr. Weasley to his feet while Ron and Hermione took down Selwyn. Bellatrix threw off her bonds and raised her wand, pointing it at the back of Fred. He saw her lips move and knew it was a killing curse. "Protego!" Harry shouted, and a shimmering shield erupted between her and Fred. She cursed and shouted another word that caused great, living flames to erupt all around. They took the form of great dragons, serpents, and other creatures like a macabre, fiery menagerie. "Get out!" Harry bellowed. "To Grimmauld Place. Go!" Ron rushed forward and grabbed his father's shoulder and his mother's hand and disappeared. Hermione whirled in one spot. The twins gripped each other's forearms, and they too left. Harry felt blindly. His glasses were hanging off one ear for Ginny's hand. He finally found it, right at his glasses, and thought with all his might of the front step of his dead godfather's house. The very last place he wanted to be, and the only place that seemed relatively safe. The burrow erupted in flames, and he felt a stab of grief in his heart for the place he'd had the closest thing he'd had to childhood. "Oi, wake up!" Ron's voice interrupted the dream of the burrow burning, for which Harry was grateful. "What were you dreaming of?" "The burrow," Harry muttered, reaching for his glasses. "Not surprised," Ron said after a moment. "I can't get out of my mind either." It was the third day of the holiday, and Harry found himself both frustrated and elated by turns. It was just as wonderful as he remembered, this place and these people. Mrs. Weasley had been kind and loving, after she'd scolded them both for the troll. She'd been mollified when they explained that they only went to find Hermione. There was never a dull moment with any of Ron's siblings. They were loud and merry, especially around this time of year. Harry could hardly stop himself from staring at Ginny. It reminded him a bit of the time he'd spent at the Burrow during the summer between his first and second year. Only this time, they both blushed, something that Harry fervently hoped the twins did not notice. It wasn't out of shyness, though, but out of strong feelings that could not be expressed any other way. "Listen," Ron broke into his reverie. "I've got an idea for getting away with Ginny. You got your cloak, right?" Harry held it up silently. "Surprised I didn't think of this before." HPHPHPHPHPHP. Despite his fitful rest, Harry found himself wide awake as he and Ron, under the invisibility cloak, tiptoed to Ginny's room and opened the door without making a sound. Ron's brilliant plan had included nothing more than the invisibility cloak and the surety that everyone else was sleeping. It was past midnight, and the small room was lit only with the light of the moon. A small figure huddled under the blankets. Harry walked tentatively over to the sleeping Ginny. He gazed down at her for a moment, drinking in the sight of her. Ron nudged him. He bent over and whispered, "Ginny, wake up." Behind him, he heard Ron mutter, "Muffliato." She murmured and sighed a little, but didn't awaken. Harry brushed her hair away from her face and pressed a small kiss on her lips. Her eyes flew open. "Harry." She yawned and grinned at him. For a moment, he couldn't say anything, but smiled back rather stupidly. "We did it," she whispered. "We did." They all grinned at each other, and Harry felt almost ridiculously happy. Harry sat down next to her, and she scooted over, making room. He took her hand and gripped it tight. "So," she said, "tell me everything." And they did. It didn't take very long. They lingered over the particularly humorous moments with Snape while she laughed delightedly. And she was in stitches while they described the fight with the troll, which had been made more difficult than they'd remembered since they had few usable spells in their arsenal. "Oh, but I'm glad Hermione's all right." Ginny stopped laughing after a moment. "But tell me about that prophecy. I've been perishing of curiosity for ages." They told her, and her face fell. "I thought it might be something like that." I finally dragged the truth out of Mum when Ron asked if Harry could stay. For some reason, she looked uncomfortable and a little worried. "Mum," she wasn't sure if Harry should. "What?" Ron said loudly. "Since when?" "Well," Ginny said slowly, "the only bit that anyone knows about, although everyone seems to know that there's more to it than that, talks about the terrible power. That wasn't in the old version, and I have to wonder what it means. Keep in mind, Harry, no one thinks that Voldemort is going to come back. Mom and Dad talk about him as if he's dead forever. What people are worried about is the fact that you apparently have this terrible power. It killed Voldemort, and now they're a little frightened of you." Mom said that about 5 years ago, there was an article in the Daily Prophet that questioned whether or not you'd be a good wizard or an evil one. The words took a while for Harry to process. It had seemed funny in Dumbledore's office on their first day of classes that anyone would think that he'd be evil. It was not funny anymore at all, if Mrs. Weasley had not wanted him. "What does Mum think?" Ron asked quietly. He had sat down at Ginny's feet while she talked. "And why didn't she want Harry around?" "Well," Ginny paused. "You know how she is. You mustn't think that she blamed Harry for what happened your first day. She blamed you just as much, Ron." "I did steal the dung bombs," Ron said modestly. Ginny giggled. "True. She had to have known that a child with no wizarding background." "Don't look at me like that, Harry. She thinks all you've known since you were 1 are the Dursleys could pull that. And she came around when she heard about the confuzzled draft. But I reckon she thought that you wouldn't have spoken up if you hadn't been with Harry." "Which is true," Harry added fairly. "Indeed," Ginny agreed. "But with the article and the weeks and weeks of detention and the troll, she's wondering, that's all." Harry sat in thought, rubbing the pad of his thumb on Ginny's palm. He remembered with perfect clarity the warmth that Mrs. Weasley had always felt for him. She'd loved him since practically the first meeting, even though he seemed to lead her children into danger quite a bit. The Ministry battle, for instance, when Sirius had died. She'd never by word or deed told him, or any of her children, he thought, that she blamed him for these dangerous situations he seemed to find himself in. He'd wondered, during his 2 weeks of depression after that particular battle, and before Dumbledore came to collect him, if Mrs. Weasley would be angry with him for taking Ginny and Ron along. When he'd shown up at the Burrow, though, those doubts had vanished. "Listen," he said, "I reckon that your mum thinks that I'm a bit dangerous to have as a friend." "Harry." But Harry stopped Ginny. "She's right. You know she is. I'm not saying that. For the most part, I don't think I've played casually with your lives. At least I've never meant to." "We know." Ron rolled his eyes. "Don't," Harry said. "This is serious. I'm not going off on one of my guilt-induced pleadings for you guys to stay away from me. I like to think that I'm beyond that, kind of. Not that I want you to stay away from me, but remembering what we lost. We feel the same way, Harry." Ginny squeezed his hand. "As I recall, none of us trusted Snape, and we all knew that Dumbledore trusted him beyond reason. It was a mistake we all made together." "Yeah," Harry sighed. "But not this time," Ron told him. "We know what's going on. Except for this terrible power I'm supposed to have," Harry said. "I don't get why that changed. I know that my greatest weapon is love. And I know that's what defeated him the first time. But what if this time it's different?" They sat in silence for a time, thinking and trying to come up with an easy solution that would explain the ramifications of the different prophecy. It was a comfortable silence, for the most part. The fact that Mrs. Weasley did not immediately trust Harry was not something that concerned Ron and Ginny too much. And Harry hoped, by the time the truth was out, that any mistrust would be obliterated. But it made him slightly wary and slightly less secure. "I'll worry about, when it comes out, that I'm a parcel mouth," Harry said finally. "If people are so worried about that prophecy and unsure of my motives, won't it deepen the misgivings?" Ginny looked thoughtful. "As I recall, it couldn't be any worse." And I'm thinking it'll be better, since Dumbledore knows everything. And Harry'll take care of everything with the basilisk in the end, Ron interjected. That'll count for something. I do wonder who wrote that article, Ginny admitted. It seemed like one of Rita Skeeter's pieces, but it was apparently anonymous. I can't see her writing something that inflammatory without having her byline on it. I wonder if it was a Death Eater, actually. That'll make sense. Even if some of them don't know exactly what steps Voldemort took to ensure his continued existence. I'll bet they'd leap at a chance to discredit me, Harry agreed. Lucius Malfoy, for one. Ron sighed. I'll be glad when we tell Hermione, that's for sure. I'll bet she'll tell us right off where we're wrong and such. Speaking of Hermione, Ginny began slyly, and Ron flushed. Quiet, you, he said. Ginny opened her eyes wide innocently, but neither one of them were fooled. She was bent on tormenting her brother for a bit, Harry realized. I just hope that you're being nice to her now. Ron grinned, though his ears were still red. I am. They still argue, Harry felt compelled to say, but it isn't mean. I can't imagine Ron and Hermione without the arguing, Ginny said ruefully. It's like foreplay for them. Ron chose that moment to leave. I'm going to bed, he announced, standing up and striding to the door. He stood with his hand on the knob and looked back at them. Don't stay up too late, children, he said gleefully. I'll be up in a few minutes, Harry promised, though he didn't want to. He was exhausted, and he knew that if he stayed too long and fell asleep, it would be disastrous. He was grateful for the time alone with Ginny, and as soon as Ron shut the door behind him, he leaned over and gave her a soft kiss. She sighed. Hard to believe that we'll have nothing more than kisses for the next few years. Don't argue, Harry said sternly. You're lucky it isn't longer. She nestled up against him. I know. This body. She looked down on herself dubiously. It's hard to reconcile a grown woman's desire with a body that hasn't gone through puberty. Don't get me wrong, Harry. The desire hasn't gone away. I know. Harry kissed her hair. It still smelled like flowers. I do know. I'm relieved that I have no desire to do anything besides a few kisses. I'd be rather worried if I did. But when I look at you, I can see the woman that you'll become. That's what makes me want the years go by fast. I know. Ginny grinned impishly at him. I'm glad I talked you down to 14. That's still young, Harry pointed out. But only in body, Harry, like I told you. Sometimes I think that the dangers of sex at the age of 14 are mental and emotional, rather than physical. Plenty of women throughout the ages have been married by the time they have their first cycle. I know, Harry said. 14 is soon enough, I think. Your body will be physically mature, and we don't have to worry about the mental and emotional aspect of it. I love you, Ginny. Always and always, Harry, she sighed. Harry knew that she was fading fast and that she needed her sleep, but he continued to stroke her hair. Intimacy did not have to be about sex, as far as he was concerned. It was about the love he felt for this woman that he had never felt for anyone else, and it translated over to everything he did. They had saved each other from the agony of the first years and the desperation of the last 4. He'd love her forever. This quiet moment was no less full of love. He finally left, leaving Ginny peacefully sleeping. She'd fallen asleep in his arms as she had so many times before. He smiled and left. HP. Harry, Ron yelled. Wake up. It's Christmas. Harry jumped out of bed, not even fully awake. He grabbed for his wand, realized where he was, and lay back down with a groan. Must you, Ron? He saw a blurry figure of a red-headed boy, grinning from ear to ear. Get up. Harry, I'll bet the others are waiting for us. We got to keep up appearances. Appearances, my arse, Harry thought. Unbelievably, Ron was still thrilled by Christmas morning, even though he knew exactly what each of the presents held. Come to think of it, though, Harry found a well of excitement inside himself. It spurred him on to pull robes over his underpants, and he was not far behind Ron when he thundered down the stairs. The tree was just as lavishly decorated as all the other times at the Burrow. Harry gazed suspiciously at the tree topper. Unable to discern whether or not it was a gnome, he turned toward the modest pile of presents that had his name on it. Only he and Percy were slow about opening their presents. Ron, the twins, and Ginny were ripping packages apart with their enthusiasm. Wrapping paper flew everywhere, while Mr. and Mrs. Weasley looked on with fond despair. Ron said. Chocolate frogs from Hermione. He held them up in victory, while Harry laughed. I got the same from her, Harry said. I'll be able to build my collection. I'll give you any of my repeats, Ron assured him. My collection's almost complete, but I always get loads of extras. I think I've got about 10 of Dumbledore. He's the most common. Thanks, Ron. Harry beamed at him. The day was spent with such a level of frivolity and fun that Harry almost felt lightheaded. After everyone had finished opening their gifts, they immediately put on their Weasley sweaters. All except Harry. He hadn't received one this year, but the wariness and unease Harry had felt when they'd spoken in Ginny's room were muted. Harry could wait for Mr. and Mrs. Weasley to trust him. Besides, Mrs. Weasley simply might not have had time to make him a sweater. Then, after a large, delicious breakfast that lasted almost 2 hours, they all marched outside to have a serious snowball battle. When they came back in, flushed from the cold and arguing heartily about who won, mugs of steaming hot chocolate awaited them. This is delicious, Mrs. Weasley, Harry said enthusiastically. Thank you for having me. If he hadn't been watching her so closely, he would have missed the doubt that flickered across her plump, kind face. You're welcome, Harry. I can't expect her to immediately trust me, Harry thought later, lying awake in bed with only Ron's loud snores for company. It isn't fair. But when he remembered the words she'd spoken to him the night, they found out that Remus and Dora Lupin had been found dead alongside their small son Teddy. Harry sat in the kitchen at Grimmauld Place, with grief weighing heavy on his heart. He was alone in the darkened room. Ron and Hermione had disappeared hours ago, and he suspected that Hermione had cried herself to sleep and Ron had been there to comfort her. Ginny also was sleeping in the next room. She'd sat with him and held his hand for hours without saying a word, but exhaustion had eventually overcome her, and Harry had quietly withdrawn. Harry, Mrs. Weasley said softly. She said, Lumos, and her wand flickered and caused the room to brighten by a degree. He turned to look at her, and could no longer keep the tears at bay. She enfolded him into a warm embrace, and held him while he cried, heartbroken. We'll get through this, she murmured. But Harry had a hard time believing it. Remus Lupin, the last true marauder, was gone, and with him, the last link to the father he'd never known. And Dora's life snuffed out too, charming, clumsy Dora with a smile that could cheer up almost anyone. Small Teddy, not even 2 years old, killed before he could really live, Harry's godson. Mrs. Weasley, Harry said finally. He withdrew, and she sat in the chair beside him. Do you really think I can do this? I know you will, she answered immediately. I've watched you grow up, Harry. I know you. If anyone can do it, you can. And you won't stop until you've defeated you-know-who. Are you sure? Harry felt a little humiliated when his voice came out very small. He almost sounded like a child, not almost 20 years old. I have faith in it, she said. So does the rest of the family and anyone who knows you. You'll defeat him. Unless I miss my guess, you're the only one who can. Not, she said ruefully and waved the hand, not holding the lit wand, that I know the full contents of the prophecy. But you're a truly remarkable wizard, Harry. And I think I've known, on some level, that you'd be the one to defeat you-know-who. I think I've known since you rescued Ginny from the chamber, and maybe even before that. Maybe I've known it since I received a certain letter from Hogwarts saying that you and my son rescued a girl you barely tolerated from a troll. You're our best hope. It must be such a burden, but I know you're up to the task. There's never been any question at all in my mind. But now she was questioning. Harry knew it. He didn't know how to prove to her that he was as far from being another Dark Lord as was possible. They couldn't tell her the secret. Dumbledore's portrait had expressly warned him not to tell anyone besides himself and Professor Snape for as long as he could. Harry had made the mistake of not trusting him before, and he would not do it again. He eased into anxious dreams in which people were talking about him in mutters behind closed doors, and he wandered through a huge house, and he could hear the people he loved, but whenever he turned to look for them, they weren't there. He cried like a baby, and eventually he looked down at himself and realized that he was a baby and he was all alone and bundled snugly in knitted blanket decorated with a W. But then Professor McGonagall came and told him that he couldn't have the blanket. She took it away, and he was left alone and naked, crying on the floor. He awoke to the familiar feeling of his scar prickling.
Greetings, Harry Potter fans. Welcome back to our page. We're continuing with the next chapter of Backward with Purpose, Part 1, Always and Always by Dead Woodpecker. So, again, don't stand up. Just sit back, relax, chill out, and listen in to Chapter 5, The Ripple Effect.
Chapter 5, The Ripple Effect. Chapter text. January was well underway by the time Harry had a chance to speak with Dumbledore alone. Ron, infuriatingly, did not share any of Harry's misgivings and did not give it as much thought as Harry would have liked. "Relax, Harry. You worry too much," Ron had said one night when they'd had a chance to meet in the room of requirement. Harry was reminded forcibly of the several instances throughout the years when Ron had blithely ignored what he called Harry's obsessions. "And you don't worry enough," Harry had replied darkly. Ron spent much of his time goading Hermione into small arguments with such relish that she could not take offense. Already, she seemed to be fonder of Ron than of Harry, and he had little doubt that her feelings would deepen when she was ready for it. It warmed his heart. Thus Harry was left to take his concerns to Dumbledore alone, and it took no small effort to find a way to do so without arousing suspicion. He thought of repeating his actions on the first day, or doing something similar, but that could lead to trouble. He also thought of asking Professor Snape to help, but he needed to speak to Dumbledore alone, and he was not sure if Snape would understand. True, they were on much better terms than they were before, but Snape was still very prickly, and Harry knew that he still resented the fact that Harry was the offspring of James and Lily. He finally resolved to send Dumbledore a message with his Patronus, and hoped that Dumbledore was not in a public place. If Aberforth heard, it wouldn't be so bad. Aberforth Dumbledore was about as tight-lipped as they came. But if Dumbledore was enjoying a drink at the Three Broomsticks, the Leaky Cauldron, or even having a conference with a teacher, it would be difficult to explain why a Patronus spoke with a child's voice. "I got to stop doing this," Harry thought, frustrated. The constant second-guessing was taking its toll. "I can't possibly live like this." With that in mind, he lifted his wand to his lips, murmured, "Expecto Patronum." The bright stag shone clearly in the room of requirement, which he currently occupied alone. Ron had long since gone to bed. Harry stared at it for a moment, thinking of his father. He wondered what James and Lily would say if they were alive. Would they understand his need to save the Weasleys and his friends? Or would they be angry that he had not tried to save them too? Tell Albus Dumbledore this, in the come-and-go room. "Need to talk." "Please," he told the stag firmly. It turned and leapt into nothing, leaving behind a misty vapor. Harry did not have long to wait. After several moments, he stood and cracked open the door of the room of requirement, both to let Dumbledore in and to give himself something to do. While he did so, he noticed the room had provided another large armchair and a crackling fire in a tall hearth. 5 minutes later, he heard swift-moving footsteps echoing along the corridor. Dumbledore was still wearing the same robes as he had that day, and he appeared alert, but not reproving. "I'm sorry, Professor," Harry said. "I hope I didn't take you from something important." "Quite all right, Harry," Dumbledore replied. He gazed around the room with an expression of open delight. "I do wish I'd known of this room earlier, I must say." He seated himself on one of the chairs and looked at Harry expectantly. "To what do I owe this very late pleasure? I have some questions for you." Harry sat down and looked at the fire. After a moment, he turned to meet the other wizard's gaze. "About the prophecy and the differences in the timeline." "Ah, I see that we have been thinking along the same lines," Dumbledore nodded. "Have you had any luck in figuring out what the terrible power you have is?" "No," Harry answered. "Not really. Professor, how did the prophecy become common knowledge? Did you and Professor Snape tell others?" "Absolutely not," Dumbledore said. "The moment I heard it, I knew that it must be kept secret. For Voldemort to find out, that would have been terrible. He looked troubled. We can only be thankful that the fullness of it was not leaked. Harry emphatically agreed. So, how did it happen? In the other time, Snape heard the first part of the prophecy, and he's the one who told Voldemort about it. Who was it this time? Dumbledore looked startled. It was Severus. That's the same. He did not turn against Voldemort until he started hunting down you and your mother and father. Harry nodded. So the Dumbledore in this time had trusted Snape with the full prophecy. No matter. It was a very small difference in the grand scheme of things, and Snape was a trusted ally. So who else knew enough of it that they could spread it throughout the wizarding world? That, Harry, is a decade-old mystery, Dumbledore sighed. We suspect that it was one of the Death Eaters. Severus claimed that he had never spoken to anyone in Voldemort's inner circle about the prophecy, but that does not mean that Voldemort did not confide in one of them. Bellatrix Lestrange and her husband seem likely candidates, and I would not be surprised if it was Lucius Malfoy. It also could have been Peter Pettigrew. We can ask him when the time comes. He could have heard it from your parents or from Voldemort. Until a few months ago, I must admit that Sirius Black was suspect. My parents knew about the prophecy? Harry asked, surprised. Yes, I explained to both them and the Longbottoms that a prophecy had been made concerning one of their sons and Voldemort, Dumbledore answered. I couldn't ask them to go into hiding without offering a reason to do so. That made sense. It didn't really change anything, but Harry had to wonder what his parents had thought when they'd realized that their son was destined to either kill Voldemort or be killed himself. Listen, Harry said. We'll ask Wormtail when we discover his true identity. But that doesn't concern me that much at the moment. I want to know about that article in the Daily Prophet concerning me and my loyalties. And then he told him everything that had occurred at the Burrow and all of his concerns, including the fact that it was of no concern to Ron at all. It was a relief that Dumbledore did not dismiss his concerns as Ron had, but instead remained silent for long moments. He appeared to be marshaling his thoughts. I can see your point, Dumbledore finally said. I can also see Mr. Weasley's. No, he held up his hand when Harry opened his mouth to argue. Do not get me wrong, I find it disturbing. But I also agree that you will prove time and time again where your loyalties lie. I believe the first time will be only months from now. I think that will dispel suspicion a great deal. Not to mention that I, forgive me my lack of modesty, have a great many friends in the wizarding world. I will do all in my power to counter the suspicion. Harry grinned at him. He felt as though a huge weight that had rested on his shoulders had been lightened. The worry was still there, but by its decrease, Harry realized just how worried he had been. Then his brows furrowed. About that article. Yes, the infamous article, Dumbledore said ruefully. Forgive me for allowing a seed of doubt. Don't worry about it, Harry assured him. You couldn't have known. He paused. Do you think it might have been written by the same Death Eater, or whoever, as leaked the prophecy? The thing is, Harry, Dumbledore said thoughtfully, I do not believe that the person who wrote the article was a Death Eater. You must remember that I taught all of them in their youth. I know them, and I know how their minds work. Unless it was a foreign Death Eater, and I'm almost positive that it wasn't, or a Death Eater previously unknown to me, I'm almost certain that none of them wrote that article. It was not an accusation, exactly. It felt more like a warning, and a well-reasoned one at that. Harry could not help but feel a little confused. If it wasn't a Death Eater, then who would write it? Rita Skeeter? No. Whoever wrote the article did it completely objectively, Dumbledore said slowly. It even swayed me a little, as I have already told you. It did not attempt to stir fear. I do not believe, although many people were afraid before the initial furor died down. It was written logically. It discussed the history of prophecies, and it offered several speculations as to the nature of this specific one. It pointed out the flaws of them, and how they do not generally come to pass in an expected manner. I would not be surprised to find that the author was an unspeakable with advanced knowledge of the subject. It offered several different speculations as to your nature, the nature of the prophecy, and concluded that the wizarding world could not immediately think of you as a savior. Harry grew warier and warier. Did it mention anything about the last bit? The part that you and Snape have kept to yourself? No, Dumbledore answered. I still have the article. I've saved it, as I dare say many have. I'll be sure to pass it along to you in the near future. After you have read it, possibly you can offer insight with your prior knowledge. Harry was doubtful. This was something completely new to him. He tapped his fingers against the arm of the chair and stared in the general direction of the wall. Why do you suppose this changed so much? As to that, I can only offer a guess. Harry snorted. Your guesses generally turn out to be true, he said fondly. Dumbledore chuckled, and his eyes twinkled madly behind his glasses. I suspect that your arrival, yours and Mr. Weasley's and Mrs. Potter's, caused a ripple effect. If you drop a stone into a pond, the ripple does not move straight out. It causes circles that move in all directions. You've already changed the future by being here. I'm not surprised that the past was also affected. Let's just hope that the future is changed far more than the past, Harry said pointedly. I don't think I could survive another devastation. HPHPHPHPHPHP. The month was almost over when Errol brought the morning mail. He flew, lopsided, through the air, clipped a few students' heads with his wings, tumbled over, righted himself, and landed on Ron's plate of fried eggs and sausages with a wheeze and a faint hoot. Ron, covered in egg, sputtered indignantly, while several of the other Gryffindors looked on and laughed. That owl doesn't look like he'd survive another trip, Hermione said thoughtfully. Harry sprinkled some water over Errol's beak, hoping it would help revive him. Yeah, because I'm going to kill him, Ron said darkly. Get your letter and give him here, Ron. Percy was beside them. I'll take him to Hagrid. Ron pulled the letter off the nearly unconscious owl's leg. Percy gently lifted Errol and left. He opened it. It's from my sister, he said. She'd better have a good reason for nearly killing Errol. Dear Ron, I'm glad you got back to school okay. Thanks for telling me all about Hogwarts. Fred and George always talked about it like it was a mixture of a dungeon where professors routinely inflicted torture on students and a muggle amusement park. I'm glad to know that it's neither. 6 more months, and I'll know for myself. I'm counting the days, and I'm marking my calendar. I met Luna Lovegood today. She's very strange. Mum thinks it's because Zella Lovegood died just last year, but in a good way. She was very quiet at first, but once our lessons were through, Mum is teaching us some basics, although she won't allow us to use a wand. We had a nice long talk. I'm sure we'll be good friends. Speaking of friends, has Harry recovered from Christmas? He seemed a bit nervous. Don't tell him I asked, of course. Love, Ginny. It was quite unlike her previous letters. It was scattered, and if there were hidden meanings behind the words, Harry could not figure them out. Either she was being too subtle, or this was only a chat-filled note to her brother. His brows furrowed. Maybe you shouldn't read other people's letters if you aren't going to like what they say, Hermione said waspishly, looking at Harry. She was on the other side of Ron, and she had obviously read it too. And Ron, you shouldn't let Harry read it if your sister doesn't want you to. Does she have a bit of a crush on Harry? Yeah, Ron said at once. She's been talking about him for years. Harry could tell that Ron was a little worried as well, although they could not possibly break away from Hermione until after herbology. They finally muttered an excuse about having to go to the loo, and found a secluded area away from prying eyes. Always and always, Ron tapped the parchment and found a long letter that contained surprising news. Boys, Luna knows. I have no idea how, and I was completely shocked. Mum had us learning basic magical theory about wands and such, and Luna was very, very quiet. She didn't say anything about Nargles or Rackspurts or Crumplehorn Snorkax, but she stared at me a lot. You know that look she gets when her eyes are even wider than normal. After the lesson, I offered to show her our Quidditch pitch, and she didn't say a word at all while I babbled. Then she asked me how old I was. When I said 10, she tilted her head and said, "How old are you really?" I nearly fell over. Then she told me her dad had told her all about time travelers, and that she knew perfectly well that I was not 10 years old. I couldn't think of a way to get out of it. You know how laughing it off never works with her. So I told her the truth. Not all of it, but I had to tell her about the two of you and how we lost nearly everyone, so we had to come back and do it all over again. I didn't tell her anything about the prophecy or the Horcruxes. I must admit that I'm still in a state of shock. She swore, and I trust her, that she wouldn't tell anyone, not even her dad. Is it bad that I'm happy that she knows? It's very lonely without the two of you to keep me company, and I know we agreed not to tell anyone until the time is right, but it makes me happy that I have someone to confide in. Just as I'm sure you both would be relieved if Hermione found out on her own, although I doubt our sensible friend will. Don't pretend that you didn't give her that book just to set the stage. I'll bet you two, and especially you, Ron, wish she'd sent a letter on Christmas telling you she'd figured out everything. She also said that there's a precedent for time travel in some of the older wizarding fairy tales, the ones even before Beetle the Bard. She said that her dad and mum used to read her the old Arthurian legends. Supposedly, the tears of Merlin actually came from Merlin himself. Given the sad way Camelot fell, I hope we have more success. I know we'll have more success. She was surprisingly rational about it, until she asked if I was Guinevere. When I said absolutely not, she actually told me that it was an easy mistake to make. How is it easy for someone to mistake me for some long-dead queen? There's my name, and that's about it. She asked me how she died, another shock. She seemed to understand when I wouldn't tell her. I don't think I can. I don't even like to think about what happened to her. Harry, don't brood over this. We always thought that Luna would be the one to guess our secret. I just didn't think that it would happen so soon. Always and always. Ginny. Harry and Ron stared at each other in stunned silence. How could she possibly have known? You owe me 10 galleons, Ron informed him. Hermione threw herself down on the floor of the common room with a loud groan. My head hurts, she moaned. You read too much, Ron told her. She tilted her head and smiled up at him. It's your own fault, she replied. That you read too much? Doubt it. When do you ever see me with a book in my hand that isn't a textbook? Ron argued. Well, that book you gave me was really interesting, she said. So I've been doing further research just for fun. Harry sat up straight and exchanged a glance with Ron. This was the first time, beyond thanking them, that she had mentioned memories unbound. It had been a month since Ginny's letter about Luna, and Harry could not help but feel a little hope that Hermione had figured it out. Perhaps the research was in different methods of time travel, and she was about to confront them with her knowledge. What? Hermione looked from one to the other. Just the fact that you call research fun, Ron grinned at her. Give us poor blokes a break. We haven't got your brains. You could if you tried, Ron. You're a very talented wizard, Hermione argued. If you paid more attention in class instead of playing hangman with Harry. Not likely, Ron shrugged. What's giving you a headache? Well, I've been researching the triumvirate of mind magic. You know, occlumency, legilimency, and obfuscamancy, Hermione explained. I've been trying to do a bit of occlumency, but it's given me a headache. Obfuscamancy, Harry asked blankly. It's a mixture between occlumency and legilimency. Occlumency is... But Ron interrupted her. We know what occlumency and legilimency are. Flipped through the book before we gave it to you. How? You ordered it from Flourish and Blots, Hermione said shrewdly. I saw the owl. How do you think we knew what to get? Harry asked quickly. Damn, Hermione was too smart for her own good. We went to Diagon Alley right after we got to the Burrow for some last-minute Christmas shopping Ron's mum had to do. Yeah, and we knew you'd like a book, Ron told her. So we tried to find an interesting one. So what's obfuscamancy? Harry asked, hoping that she wouldn't know that they'd ordered it back in early November. It was just lucky that they had, in fact, gone to Diagon Alley, so if she asked one of the older Weasley boys, their story wouldn't completely fall apart. Well, the bit about obfuscamancy is a bit confusing, but from what I can work out, it's sort of a mixture of occlumency and legilimency. No, that isn't quite right. While legilimency is offensive and occlumency is defensive, obfuscamancy is both. Harry wondered if he'd have better luck with obfuscamancy and resolved to speak to Professor Snape the next time he went for his weekly torture. Occlumency continued to elude him, just as it had in the past. This time, he was actually trying, and despite his desire to erect a wall in his head that would keep Voldemort from discovering his secrets, it was not going well. He'd managed a thin shield last time, but Snape had battered through it within 30 seconds. How so? Harry asked. Unlike occlumency, it does not attempt to keep out a legilimens, Hermione explained. It's more like it traps them in specific memories. Although that's a horrid explanation. Let's say If someone has something to hide, they can effectively use some of their own memories as a shield. It isn't perfect, of course, but the benefit is that the Legilimens won't even know. Leave it to Hermione, Harry thought. She's only 12 years old, and she's still smarter than us. He grinned. My dad reckons that you know who is a Legilimens, Ron told her. That's why we're so interested. I reckon I might learn this occlumency. Hermione looked horrified at the thought of Voldemort being able to read minds. That's what I've been doing. That's why I've got such a headache, she bit her lip, and said so quietly that Harry had to lean forward to listen. Do you really think that he's going to come back? You know who? Yes, Harry said gently. The first time I met him, Hagrid said that he didn't think Voldemort was really gone. He ignored her flinch. He said that Dumbledore didn't think he really was either. They sat in silence for a time. Ron fidgeted with a tear in the armchair, while Hermione stared up at the ceiling. Harry repeated the vow he'd made repeatedly to himself over the last years, ever since Dumbledore's portrait had given them hope for a future without devastating loss. I'll be ready this time, Harry vowed. What did you think of the rest of the book? Ron asked after a time. Hermione snorted. A lot of it is complete rubbish. The triumvirate of mind magic is about the only thing useful. And there's a very interesting section on memory charms. I do wonder if the author wasn't insane. How so? Harry asked, confused. Well, for one, why would he use that stupid nickname? The wise ASP, she scoffed. Why not just use his own name instead of a ridiculous nickname? And he wrote about all sorts of the things that couldn't possibly be real. Not that I don't appreciate the gift, she assured them. Ginny had mocked the ridiculous nickname of the author as well. The wise ASP, she asked, grinning, holding the thick and obviously old tome in her hands. The author is a genius that chooses to go by a nickname that sounds like wise ass. Dumbledore's portrait chuckled. I must admit that it sounds humorous to me as well. But it is my thought that the man, or woman, was in Slytherin and wished to pay homage to his old house. But also, it is a reference to the wise ape, a former governor on an island in ancient days. He was also a wizard, and he ruled both wizards and muggles. This was before the Statute of Secrecy. It is said that his library rivaled that of the Library of Alexandria when it came to arcane knowledge. Still, Ginny said, it sounds bad. Some geniuses have little in the way of common sense. Dumbledore agreed. I like the Tears of Merlin bit, Ron offered. I thought it was really interesting. It was interesting, Hermione agreed. But don't you think it belonged in a book of fairy tales? It's completely impossible. How do you know? Ron muttered. Harry tried not to watch them too eagerly. Ron was being a bit reckless, he felt, but he found himself wanting to hear Hermione's answer. Time traveling? Hermione asked incredulously, sending memories back years and years. My dad told me that they have time turners in the ministry, Ron pointed out. I don't know about years and years, but they can definitely manage a few hours. The Tears of Merlin doesn't exist, Ron, Hermione said exasperatedly. And even if it did you read what it required? It's terrible. I frankly can't imagine anyone being that desperate. Hermione has no idea, Harry thought as he crawled into his bed later that evening. It was early yet. Ron was still playing a rather loud game of Exploding Snap with Neville. Harry had been playing with them, but pleaded a headache when Neville won his fourth consecutive game and made to set it up again. He forced the thought away and focused on emptying his mind. Until he had spoken with Snape, he couldn't afford to ignore his practice. Try Potter, Snape growled from in front of him. He'd just broken into Harry's mind again with what seemed like little effort. It was 2 days after the discussion he and Ron had had with Hermione, and Harry had not experienced any sort of miraculous change with his occlumency skills. I am, Harry snarled through gritted teeth. If you want to save all your little friends this time around, you'd better try harder, Snape warned viciously. Honestly, Potter, you can defeat the Dark Lord, travel through time, and you still can't muster the concentration required to become an occlumens? Harry panted and rested his head against the cold stone wall of the dungeons. It was evening, and he'd had a particularly long day. He'd had another nightmare, and could not fall back to sleep despite the fact that it had only been 4 in the morning. Professor, he said, ignoring Snape's question, and winced. It felt like his head had been split open with a dull axe. Sir, do you think I should try obfuscamancy instead? Snape looked stunned for a moment, but hit it quickly. Is that what you eventually did last time? No, no. I'd never even heard of it until Hermione Granger told me about it 2 days ago, Harry replied. He quickly told him about what had transpired in the common room 2 days before. Was that wise? Giving the Granger girl that book? Harry paused. I hope so. We're going to tell her eventually, and we've set the stage a bit. Perhaps it'll open her mind a little. Also, it inspired her to learn occlumency on her own. That can only be a good thing. If she can. You seem unable to. Harry grinned, despite himself. Hermione's not at all like me. She's more rational. I think the only person less suited for occlumency than me is Ron. We're both two. He searched for a word that described his inability to learn to shield. Reckless, I suppose. We're not pragmatic enough. I don't know. It makes me wonder why the Hat wanted to put us in Slytherin. Snape's mouth twisted, as if he had just swallowed something very bitter. Your plan is very cunning and ambitious. You obviously know that these are traits that my house is known for. Harry hid a smile. It was perhaps the first compliment that Snape had ever given him, and he did not look happy to have done so. About obfuscamancy. Yes, Snape rubbed his chin. I must admit to some surprise that I did not think of this sooner. Or, all in your timeline. Now it seems obvious that you must train yourself in this. The fact that you have a wealth of other memories to choose from makes it tailor-made to your situation. I might have to give Granger a few points for Gryffindor when she answers a question tomorrow. Or perhaps just allow her to answer one. You know how she likes to be a know-it-all. What exactly is obfuscamancy? Harry asked. Hermione's explanation had not gone into any sort of depth. To put it simply, it is a shield of sorts like occlumency, but instead of a wall, there will be a maze of memories, Snape said. Again, it is well suited to you. While it takes everyone else much effort to choose the memories that would be appropriate, you have them already. Why didn't think of this sooner? No matter. But won't Voldemort? Do not say his name. Snape hissed. Sorry, sir, but won't you know who'll be able to get through this maze? Obfuscamancy is a spiral. When Harry looked completely blank, he continued. I suggest that you put nearly all of your memories from the past, up until the moment you meet Quirrell, into this spiral. And I mean all your memories. It would be nearly impossible for the Dark Lord to maintain the connection long enough to make it through all of them. And since it's a spiral, it would repeat itself, moving upward through the years. You begin with the most recent and end with the very first things you remember. And then it moves from begins again. Harry started to understand. How do I do it, sir? Well, you have to start by. Not even the rain-washed April could dampen Harry's spirits as he sat underneath his invisibility cloak a little ways off the road to Hogsmeade. He was waiting for Dumbledore to take him to the Gaunt Shack where they would liberate and destroy the Ring Horcrux. Ron would have gone with them, but he was serving detention with Professor Snape, neither of whom was pleased. Ron wanted to either be with Harry and Dumbledore, despite his wariness of Horcruxes, or at the Quidditch pitch, watching the match between Gryffindor and Slytherin. But he did not have the same background in occlumency that Harry did, and he was not as quick to pick of obfuscamancy. Not that Harry was a perfect obfuscamance, but he and Snape had reckoned that he had a good grasp on it, enough to counter any legilimency Voldemort might use during his first encounter with Harry. He did not nearly have all of his memories included in the spiral of the obfuscamancy shield, but he had enough that he was certain Voldemort would not suspect a thing. The mystery of the Philosopher's Stone was well underway. Hermione had thrown herself into searching for clues. She suspected Snape, which amused Ron and Harry to no end, and they'd had several laughs about it in the Room of Requirement. But with a tiny nudge from Harry, she'd also begun to suspect Professor Quirrell. Harry had mentioned that he'd overheard Quirrell talking to someone without even a hint of a stutter. Harry, Dumbledore said softly, cutting through his thoughts. Harry got up and followed him down the road. Both were silent during the 15 minutes it took to reach a small alley beside the Hogshead Inn. Harry waited for him right outside the back door, while Dumbledore entered the front and immediately exited. Moments later, maintaining a tight grip on Dumbledore's forearm, Harry felt the familiar, unsettling feeling of being squeezed through a tube. That went well, Harry offered. Indeed, Dumbledore agreed amicably. He held out a small cup to Harry. I've taken the liberty of acquiring a few strands of hair from a muggle, Harry. I think it best if you're well disguised. Even out here, Harry took it and grimaced before he drank the entire potion down. It was just as vile as he remembered. As soon as his body lengthened and grew stouter, he pulled off his cloak. A woman. Harry looked down at his body incredulously. He was a stout, older lady who was roughly the same size and shape as his old neighbor, Arabella Figg. Dumbledore's eyes twinkled madly. I thought it best. It adds further layers of deception to our presence. We're an old man and his daughter out for a walk, perhaps. It could easily have been an old man and his son. You're enjoying this, Harry accused. Dumbledore did not even attempt to deny it, but motioned him forward. Feeling awkward in this completely different body, he did so. His breasts jiggled as he walked. He could not help but feel mortified. The shack previously owned by the Gaunt family came into sight after 5 minutes of trudging up the dusty, little-used road that connected Little Hangleton and Great Hangleton. At one point, Harry stopped to shield his eyes with his hand and gaze in the direction of the small cemetery he knew was there. If all went to plan, he would be there in 3 years, watching his Wormtail resurrected Voldemort once more. The Gaunt shack was even more overgrown and ramshackle than Harry remembered. The walls were practically falling down, and they looked decayed and like to fall down with a strong wind. The sight of it caused him to remember a question he'd had for years and years. Professor, why didn't Voldemort protect any of his Horcruxes with the Fidelius charm? I believe that Voldemort thought his protection sufficient, Dumbledore replied. And the nature of the Fidelius charm would not appeal to him, despite its ability to protect a location beyond almost anything else. How so? The Fidelius charm requires at least 2 people. Did you never wonder why your mother and father did not simply cast the charm themselves? Or from what you've shown me in your memories, why I was the secret keeper for Grimmauld Place? Dumbledore asked him. In order for the charm to work, the secret must be entrusted, which is where the name of it came from. Voldemort would never give anyone such a valuable gift. It is not in his nature to trust, as I am sure you know. But he trusted Lucius Malfoy with the diary and Bellatrix Lestrange with the cup, Harry felt compelled to point out. But he did not tell him what they were. The Fidelius charm would have required him to tell another soul what he was about. It isn't just the location that is a secret, Harry. Harry mulled that over in his mind while Dumbledore opened the door. He'd never thought about it before, which surprised him. How could he have never wondered why his parents had had to choose a secret keeper besides themselves? It is here. Dumbledore interrupted his thoughts. Harry felt a wave of relief. He had wondered if the ripple effect, as he and Ron called it now, would change the locations of some of the Horcruxes. Give me a moment, Harry, Dumbledore said, and lifted his wand. He muttered several different spells under his breath, although Harry had no idea what they could be. He heard a bang and a flash of light, and felt an invisible hand pressing him back against the less than sturdy wall. There it is, he heard, and the pressure lifted. He told himself to remember to ask Dumbledore what he had done to break the concealments. A floorboard had been lifted up, though Dumbledore had not moved, revealing a small box. Stupidly, Harry moved forward. Harry, no. Dumbledore tried to stop him, but it was too late. Pain beyond all reason racked Harry's body, and he fell heavily to the floor. He screamed, an anguished, pitiful sound like nothing he had heard himself make. Not even the Cruciatus Curse could turn his every nerve ending against him. It traveled like waves and waves of fire, and he couldn't think as he buckled and seized upon the dirty floor. No more. Gradually it began to ease. His limbs jerked with spasms, but the intensity of the fire that traveled through his body receded until it was only a memory. I'm so sorry, Harry heard someone say, and realized it was himself speaking. Pay attention to me, an old man shouted, gripping his shoulders and shaking him. Pay attention. Do you know who you are? I'm sorry, Harry said again. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Tell me who you are. Harry licked his lips, thinking. The effort hurt, but he wanted the man to stop shaking him. Who was he? He wasn't a woman. He was certain of it. He was a boy, trapped in a woman's body. His name was Harry. Harry Potter. His parents were dead. They'd been murdered, and whoever murdered them wanted to kill him too. He thought about that, and decided the man's name was Voldemort, or maybe it was Tom Riddle. No, it was both. He had a stupid nickname, like the Marauders, like the Half-Blood Prince, like the Wise ASP. Always and always. Something cracked inside his head, and clarity returned. He sat up straight and winced when his stomach clenched. He leaned away from Albus Dumbledore and vomited onto the floor. A little of it splashed on the dress he was wearing. I'm Harry Potter, and I travel from the future using the tears of Merlin, he told him, once he'd thrown up everything he'd eaten for the last day. I remember it. I remember everything. I'm sorry I was so stupid. An easy mistake to make, Dumbledore said weakly. I thought you were lost. You didn't say anything for 5 minutes, and then you started saying you were sorry, and that was all I could get you to say. What was it? A terrible curse. I didn't even know it was there until you walked right into it. I take it the other Albus Dumbledore did not tell you about it. Harry shook his head. You probably didn't think I need to know. He'd already gotten a ring. Only moments longer, and I fear all would have been lost. Dumbledore looked badly shaken and strangely vulnerable. Harry gripped the wizard's forearm. His fingers still shook from a curse. I'm glad I told you, Harry said. I think I need you more now than I did then, which is saying quite a lot. Dumbledore took several deep breaths and rose to his feet. Harry wanted to do the same, but he wasn't sure that his legs would hold him upright. Professor, he said, don't put on a ring. Harry watched as he carefully made his way to the small box. He was not worried. Dumbledore knew that the ring was cursed and would not fall into temptation as he had the last time. He would not find himself with a cursed, deadened hand and only a year to live. Snape would hopefully not need to kill him atop the astronomy tower. Still, he watched and was glad he did. As soon as the box was opened, Dumbledore's face changed. His eyes were blank, and he smiled a wistful, happy smile that was out of place. Harry watched with horror as he reached inside and took the ring. What are you doing? Harry shouted, and despite the fact that his legs were shaky along with the rest of his body, he hurtled toward Dumbledore and knocked it out of his hand just as he was about to slip it on his finger. Dumbledore fell sideways with a grunt. The strange woman's body was heavier than Harry had ever been in his life. He looked at the ring and decided it was safer if he was the one to touch it. With that thought, he picked it up. Dumbledore obviously could not stand the temptation to hear words of comfort from Ariana and from his parents. His parents. Harry could use the Resurrection Stone to see his parents. They would reassure him that what he was doing was right. They would tell him that they were proud of him, that he could do this. And he could tell them that he was sorry for not trying to change the past enough that they would still be alive. Guilt nearly crushed him. He forgot the curse that had caused the other Dumbledore's death, and the fact that he would never have been able to save Lily and James Potter. He had to tell them that he was sorry, and the only way to do that would be to put on the ring. There was a loud bang, and Harry found himself thrown backward and through the wall. The ring clattered to the floor, unnaturally loud. Let's stay away from that ring, Harry said finally. Ingenious, Dumbledore murmured. Then, louder, you are quite right, Harry. That's one of the vilest curses I have ever seen. I mean no offense, the pain curse was quite horrible. But this, like an Imperius curse, it made us forget what we were doing and what we were about. It tried to trap us into death. I assume you meant to use the Resurrection Stone as well. Yes, Harry answered. The other Dumbledore thought that he hadn't any idea what the stone was, though. He only thought it was a priceless heirloom. And I still suspect it, Dumbledore said. I believe that if anyone else besides the two of us, and Mr. Weasley, Mrs. Potter, and Professor Snape, of course, would simply put on the ring despite the danger. We were particularly vulnerable, I believe, but we will never know for sure. I'm going to destroy it with fiend fire. But do not worry. When Voldemort returns to Little Hangleton, the Gaunt Shack will stand once more. We will rebuild it. Later. Now, Are you able to perform the spell of protection that will shield us from curious onlookers? Harry strode around the shack in a wide circle, murmuring the spells Hermione had taught him while they'd been on the run. He did it almost absently. The other Dumbledore never knew about the curse, he thought. He just thought that he'd been weak and tempted by the stone enough to cause his own death. And I didn't even question it. I thought he'd been weak, too. The thought made him strangely sad. Dumbledore, who had seemed to know everything, had been tricked into thinking he'd made a terrible mistake. Will it destroy the stone? Harry asked, coming to a halt beside Dumbledore, who stood on the threshold. Yes, he said. I'm certain of it. Fiend fire is even more destructive than basilisk venom, for not only does it destroy the physical, it destroys the spells and magic of that which is destroyed. It will no longer be a hallow. Harry blew out a slow breath and remembered the one and only time he had used the stone. His parents, Sirius, Remus, what he'd thought were all the Weasleys and Hermione, Luna, Neville. Seeing them had given him the desire to basically commit suicide to be with them, though he did not like to think about that. The Horcrux inside of him had been killed instead, and he had returned to find that Ginny and Ron had yet lived, otherwise he might have done it again. While it was an uncomfortable thought, he wondered if he'd be able to willingly put himself in the path of the killing curse if he was not also the master of death. He wasn't sure that it was wholly his mother's blood that had saved him. He knew without having to ask that Dumbledore, too, regretted the necessity of destroying the stone. The older man had lost loved ones as well, loved ones to whom he wished to speak, and the resurrection stone was his only chance. He also knew what Harry did, and how the fact that he had united the three Deathly Hallows had played a part in his continued survival. Do it, Harry said quietly. They watched the shack burn, side by side, a few feet away from the destructive flames. Harry heard an eerie, keening scream and knew that it was done. He felt a mixture of relief and foreboding. Don't tell them, Harry said, thinking of Ron and Ginny and how they would react to the uncertainty of Harry's survival. Dumbledore seemed to understand.
Hi there, Potterheads! Welcome back to the channel. We are continuing with the next chapter of Backward with Purpose, Part 1, Always and Always, by Dead Woodpecker. So here we have it. Just sit back, relax, and again, chill out. This is Part 6, or rather, Chapter 6, The Dragon and the Stone.
Chapter 6, The Dragon and the Stone. Chapter text. It was not until the day before Harry and Hermione were due to liberate the dragon, Norbert. Harry had almost blurted out that they ought to call it Norbert instead, but stopped himself just in time from Hagrid's hut and sent him off to Charlie, that Dumbledore made good on his promise to provide Harry with a copy of the article. Both of them had forgotten. They heard Dumbledore's footsteps before he disillusioned himself so that Harry and Snape could see him. Ron was in the hospital wing, having his bitten hand attended to by Madame Pomfrey. It had amused Snape to no end that Ron had found himself bitten again, even though he knew well enough to avoid it. He had even been, well, not nice, but less biting since Harry had told him. Harry noticed immediately that Dumbledore held a copy of an old edition of the Daily Prophet, and his eyes widened. You brought it. Blimey, I'd completely forgotten. You've had a busy term, he said. As have I. You're giving him the article? Snape was surprised. He asked to see it. Dumbledore said mildly. I don't think we should keep it from him. Do you have a reason for not wanting him to read it? I'm sitting right here, Harry said irritably. Snape ignored him. I would not be surprised if he did something rash, like getting on the wrong end of a curse that nearly steals what few wits he has. Snape had been on hand when Dumbledore and Harry had returned from their adventure outside Little Hangleton, and had supplied him with the potion that caused the tremors to finally abate. I'm not going to do anything rash, said Harry. I don't believe he will. Severus, said Dumbledore, as if Harry hadn't spoken. Besides, there isn't much he could do even if he wanted to. Just give me the damn article, said Harry. Before the other two could continue arguing, he snatched it out of Dumbledore's grasp and began to read. Harry Potter, The Prophecy, and HEWH must not be named. In the 6 years since the fall of you-know-who, the wizarding world, both in Britain and abroad, has viewed young Harry Potter as a savior. It is true that you-know-who could not kill him on the Halloween night that resulted in the deaths of James and Lily Potter. The child survived the killing curse, a feat that is unheard of, and you-know-who disappeared. These are the facts that led to the celebrations throughout Britain, and also why Harry Potter and his scar are famous. The fact that it was revealed that there was indeed a prophecy that foretold this happenstance, in which Harry Potter was named the Chosen One, only made the downfall of he who must not be named even more a cause for joy after so many years of darkness. And yet experts on prophecy are troubled. One Reagan Forthill, son of renowned seer July Forthill, expressed his misgivings on the matter. Prophecies and oracles and things of that nature have never been predictable, my mother always said. She told me of many times throughout her lifetime when she saw something, was certain of the meaning, and yet turned out to be completely wrong, he said, speaking to me from his home in Devon. This is fact. It is said that there's a hall of prophecy within the Department of Mysteries in our own Ministry of Magic. It is also fact that the Great Nezinim Institute in Russia has an extensive library relating to prophecies and prophets, and they have always maintained that no human mind could possibly consider all the ramifications of any prophecy. An even more damning source is that of the centaurs, known to possess the skills of reading the stars that humans lack. A centaur that lives with the herd in the Forbidden Forest discussed with me at length what he had read in the stars. At this moment in time, the wizarding world lies between two great wars. He claims that this time of peace is a brief respite, and one that will not last even another decade. The centaur prefers to remain anonymous because of the sensitive nature of these claims, but they are true nonetheless. Due to the unpredictable nature of prophecies, I am certain that it would be a wiser course to be watchful rather than jubilant, careful instead of automatically trusting, and cautious instead of open-armed. Less cautious witches and wizards will point to the fact that Harry Potter is, at the moment I am writing this, aged 7 years old, and only just experiencing accidental magic. However, in 4 years, the child will be attending Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, and there he will learn power and tools that he may use for good or for ill. The first part of the prophecy has been well known almost since it was made, and it seemed to come to fruition with the downfall of you-know-who. But I am suspicious of this terrible power that Harry Potter is destined to have. What about that baby could stop the most powerful dark wizard in centuries? Have we seen the last of it? Or will this second war that the centaur predicted be against Harry Potter, thought to be the savior of the wizarding world? Given all that is unknown, I think it wise to consider these possibilities. Again, I will point out the fact that Harry Potter is only 7 years old. But he who must not be named was a child once as well. There are curious likenesses between the two. Harry Potter is also an orphan, and it is safe to assume that he will grow up to be a powerful wizard. Even the very nature of the prophecy made about both of them hints that there is an odd connection between their two destinies. The question must be asked, is Harry Potter responsible for the defeat of you-know-who, or is he the next you-know-who? Or even worse, the likelihood of him become a great wizard is shared equally with him becoming a threat the likes of which the world has never seen. The fact that the entire wizarding world believes him to be the epitome of good is even more disturbing. You-know-who had to work to gain his followers, but every wizard, witch, and child knows the name of Harry Potter. He is known throughout the world. He will not have any problem at all gaining followers, unless we are careful. By the time Harry had finished reading, his belly was clenched in a tight fist, and he felt slightly nauseated. The worst part of it was that it was eminently reasonable, as Dumbledore had claimed. It was logical, well thought out, and did not strike him as written for the express purpose of inspiring fear. But Harry waved his arm. I need a moment. He had a greater understanding of Mrs. Weasley's wariness. Some part of her probably feared that Harry was turning her own son into a Death Eater, and the odd things that had happened this year, such as the more thoughtful reaction to Harry's sorting and the fact that the Slytherins did not taunt him that much. Even Draco Malfoy, despite his cutting comments, had sometimes looked at him with calculation rather than scorn. It only really hit him just now that while he'd received applause when he had been sorted into Gryffindor, he had also been on the receiving end of a lot of assessing looks. He'd explained away the Slytherins by telling himself that the taunts had been because he was on the Gryffindor house team. But perhaps it was because they were afraid of him, afraid that if he did turn out to be a new Dark Lord, he would remember them. And Draco had probably been warned by his father not to be too much of a git. Lucius Malfoy still believed that Voldemort was dead, never to return. Ron and Ginny needed to be told as soon as possible what this article contained. It was subtler than they'd thought it would be, and therefore more dangerous. And, thinking of Ron, Harry finally spoke. "So, what do you think I should call my followers?" He wanted to be able to laugh this off. "Excuse me. I mean, the two of you are my followers. I've used my status as the chosen one, and you've succumbed to my dark glamour." Harry swallowed. He sounded too bitter. "I ought to think of a good name, and I reckon you two have got a say in it. Death Eater is already taken. How about Night Crawlers?" Dumbledore and Snape exchanged glances. "I can see why this has upset you, Harry." "I'm not upset," Harry denied truthfully. "I'm really not." "Could have fooled me," Snape muttered. "It's just started a little earlier than last time." "It wasn't until my 4th year that things got bad," said Harry. "And like you told me months ago, Dumbledore, saving the stone from Voldemort will go a long way to proving the article wrong. It's just, I'm disturbed." "Rightfully so," Dumbledore murmured. "I think anyone would find this disturbing. I certainly did, especially when I found out that, despite the fact that the quote from Regan Forthill was entirely true, he had no recollection of speaking to anyone about it. The Centaurs also have made it clear that although the stars do say that we are in brief respite between wars, none of them had talked to any human about it. After that first week, when you and Mr. Weasley handed me your amazing news, I went again to Regan Forthill's home. I found out that he had died. Murder? No. By all accounts, it was a perfectly natural death. He was very old, you see, and had contracted dragonpox. There was an outbreak of it about 2 years ago. He died in St. Mungo's. I had wanted to ascertain whether or not a memory charm had been placed on him," he explained. "What the Centaurs?" Snape asked. "I presume you spoke to them again." "Indeed," Dumbledore nodded. "They had no new information. However, it is almost impossible, and I would say that it is impossible, except Harry here has reminded me that I am capable of being surprised, to use a memory charm on a centaur." "You think they lied?" "It wasn't a question. It is the most likely possibility," he agreed, "although I can't imagine why they would. While the centaurs have been, for the most part, nominally neutral, that is only because they refuse to take sides in wizarding affairs, much like the goblins. However, also like the goblins, they have no reason to support Voldemort or to defame Harry." "Another mystery," Harry said glumly. "I still think he's going to do something rash," Snape said. "I'm not." Harry shook his head. "I can't afford to. It's just such an odd feeling to be back in this body again and have this desire to prove myself again. I grew out of it long ago, and it's different. I'm not afraid that of being famous. I accepted that. I want people to know that I'd never be like Voldemort." "They will," Dumbledore promised. Harry had to look away from the compassion he saw in his eyes. HPHPHPHPHPHP. Norberta raised quite a fuss. Then again, so did Hagrid. "He's going to miss his mummy." Hagrid sobbed into a handkerchief the size of a bedsheet. "He's never been away from me before. He's just a baby." Hermione patted Hagrid's arm as his sobs grew harder and harder. "Hagrid, you're doing what's best for your baby. Norbert will be able to grow up with other dragons. He might even find a lady friend when he's old enough." I know. Hagrid swiped at his eyes. "But I'll miss him. I'm sure he'll miss you too." Harry looked dubiously at the dragon. They made a makeshift carrier for it, and already he was worrying at the straps with his sharp teeth. Finally, Hagrid allowed them to go, and his cries echoed after them all the way up to the tower. Harry and Hermione huddled under the invisibility cloak, hoping that they would not be given away by the snarls and growls that came from Norberta while she tore apart the teddy bear Hagrid had given her as a going-away gift. Despite the fact that Harry knew that they would see Norberta off safely with Charlie's mates, his heart pounded in his chest, and he was quite relieved when they reached the top of the stairs. Did you hear, Malfoy? Hermione beamed. Detention, and 20 points from Slytherin because he tried to get us in trouble. Harry could not help but laugh with her. She was so openly delighted at the prospect of Malfoy in trouble. We'll have precious few laughs when everyone hates us, Harry thought reasonably. We did it, we did it. Hermione squealed and whirled around onto the stairs. She continued the victory dance that she'd begun on the top of the astronomy tower, and Harry had to grab her elbow to keep her from falling over. Hermione's excitement was infectious. It was a good thing that Harry had already planned to get detention. He hadn't before, but now he wanted to have a legitimate reason for speaking to the centaur, Firenze. Even if they'd had the invisibility cloak, Argus Filch was not deaf, and they were making quite enough noise to alert him. Well, we are in trouble. Filch stepped out from the shadows at the bottom of the long stair. Hermione screamed. He dragged them to Professor McGonagall's office, his face lit with unholy glee. He muttered threats under his breath the entire way, and Hermione sobbed. 15 uncomfortable minutes later, Harry, Hermione, and Neville marched in silence back to Gryffindor Tower. Hermione was beyond tears now, so shocked that she had lost Gryffindor 50 points, she could not even speak. Neville, pale and shaking, was wide-eyed. Neville. Harry put a hand on his shoulder, and the other boys started. Neville, I'm so sorry. Harry, it's all my fault. Neville turned to look at him, an anguished look on his face. If I hadn't followed you. It isn't your fault, Neville, Harry said sternly. You were trying to help us. BB, but you didn't need help, Neville pointed out. I just got Gryffindor into even more trouble. I deserve it, but you guys don't. There really was a dragon, wasn't there? Harry and Hermione exchanged looks. Yeah, Harry said in a low voice, and slowed down once they neared the corridor where the fat lady hung. But please don't tell. It'll just get Hagrid into trouble. Neville moaned, and put his face in his hands. They're going to be so angry. And he was right. Gryffindor had been vying for the second-place slot with Ravenclaw, but the subtraction of 150 points had dropped them so far in the rear that they could not hope to catch up. Harry briefly wondered if Dumbledore would give them enough points that they would overcome Slytherin again, but he doubted it. They were over 200 points behind. Harry managed the jeers and scowls and naked dislike rather well. He knew when to duck his head and let it slide by. At least Ron stood beside him and was rather aggressive in defending him, Hermione, and Neville to their peers. And, strangely enough, Percy Weasley was surprisingly forgiving. Breaking the rules is never without consequence, Percy said pompously 3 days after the incident. They were on their way to breakfast early, to avoid the mad rush when they'd have to deal with more of their fellow Gryffindors. I know, Neville said miserably. The shunning and downright hatred had hit him the hardest. The fact that he had received a howler from his grandmother the day before had not helped. But I think the rest of them are being rather spiteful, Percy said. I lost 10 points for Gryffindor once in my first year. It wasn't 50, Ron said fairly. 10 points is nothing compared to this. And there are 3 of them. Percy straightened to his full height. That isn't the point, Ron. The entire house is being hateful. I think that losing the points and getting yet another detention would be punishment enough. Especially since there was a good, but he abruptly closed his mouth. You know, Harry asked in a low voice. Not until yesterday, Percy said in a hushed voice. Charlie sent me a letter, said that there was a good chance that you and your friends would be out way past curfew, Ron. It wasn't difficult to put together the pieces. Ron's bite, the fanciful tale about a dragon that Malfoy was spreading around, and how else would Charlie know about it? Harry and Ron exchanged wide-eyed glances. We wrote to him, Ron said in a hushed voice. When we found out that someone had an illegal dragon. In the future, Ron, Percy drew himself up to his full height. And you two, Hermione and Harry and Neville, you should come to me with something like this. I'm a prefect, but we didn't want anyone to get into trouble. Ron said loudly, and no one would have. Prefects are allowed out after curfew, Percy told him. Then he swept inside the Great Hall, leaving them standing there, stunned. Harry thought about Percy's words a lot in the days leading up to their detention. He and Ron had spoken about it for over an hour when they met in the Room of Requirement. Harry was certain that Percy had received the letters so long ago, and equally certain that he had figured out that they had, in fact, saved Hagrid from getting into a lot of trouble with the Ministry. "It's because we're treating him better," Ron said, his mouth full of chocolate frog. He knew back then, but he isn't as standoffish now. Even the other Percy wasn't as vicious as the rest of them, Harry said slowly. He was cold, but that might have been because we'd broken the rules. Did you hear him? Ron laughed. He actually hinted that he would have taken the dragon to meet Charlie's mates. Can you picture the other Percy doing that? No, said Harry. They did not have the chance to meet without the presence of Hermione and Neville very often anymore. The four of them stuck together for the most part, united in the face of the entire school's dislike. Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff students were still annoyed with them, while Harry thought with some pride. The Gryffindor Quidditch team was not as good as it had been when he was on it. They had made a rather good showing during the last match. They had flattened Hufflepuff by almost 200 points, and if they beat Slytherin in the match set to take place while Harry recovered from his encounter with Voldemort, they stood a chance to win the cup. Thus, the four banded together for protection, and Ron and Harry had to keep inventing excuses to get away. "I'll be glad when this year is over," Harry said with a sigh. "Next year won't be fun, but at least Ginny will be here." Harry felt as though he was walking with ghosts as he, Hagrid, Hermione, Neville, and Draco Malfoy stepped onto the path that led into the Forbidden Forest. For a moment, everything shifted, and he was in the body of a 21-year-old. Almost everyone he loved was dead. They were gone forever. They were never coming back. Tom Riddle was also gone, but Harry, who had spent the last decade fighting for that end, did not seem to care. He staggered onto the path that led to the Forbidden Forest, just outside Hagrid's hut. It looked like Hagrid, too, was dying of wounds inflicted by Voldemort's giants. Emergency healers from St. Mungo's had looked as though there was little hope. This was what Harry had fought for, to be the last man standing. It seemed so ridiculous that Harry had laughed, a mad and wild sound that frightened him. It seemed to echo strangely among the trees. He looked down at the stone, still held tightly in his palm. He had dropped it when he had been struck by Voldemort's killing curse. He did not want to summon them again. It had been all right when he had thought he was about to die. He'd been about to join them. They were fetching him. But now, how could he possibly bear the guilt of surviving? All of them, they died like they were supposed to, whether it was by the killing curse, or flame, or some other method. But no, he was Harry Potter, the boy who lived. It seemed like he was the only one who lived. He flung the stone into the trees as far as it would go. He couldn't possibly face them, not when it was so bloody unfair that he still breathed and they did not. He knelt on the ground and gripped his hair in his hands, pulling so tightly on it that it hurt. He wondered how he would do it. Should he slit his wrists with Gryffindor's sword? How was that for irony? Jump from the astronomy tower, his body broken and bent like Dumbledore's? Had it actually come to this? He was plotting his own death instead of Voldemort's. Harry was so lost in that memory that Hermione's touch on his arm and quiet Harry caused him to fall over in the nearby bushes. For a moment, he had no bearing on where he was or who he was. "All right, Harry." Hagrid looked back at him. "Scared, Potter?" Malfoy sneered. "Not as scared as you," Harry retorted, pulling himself out of the bushes. He made an effort, after that, to stay in this time. He asked Hagrid questions about the unicorns and talked quietly with Hermione when Hagrid was not listening about the stone. He felt relieved, though, when Draco scared Neville and he parted company with Hagrid and Hermione. They knew him too well, and he could parry Draco's comments with ease. "Never thought I'd see the day when I was grateful for Malfoy's company," Harry thought darkly. His scar warned him when Voldemort was near. Dimly, he registered Malfoy's screams and his flight away. But he kept his eyes on the dark shadow that desecrated the flesh of the unicorn. He had a better understanding now of what it actually meant. Voldemort, as Dumbledore had told him, had gone so far beyond usual evil that he had no trouble with destroying innocence and purity for his own ends. The unicorn's death foreshadowed the death of Harry's generation's innocence. The flower of a generation. Harry Potter, the centaur Firenze, said, "It is not safe for you especially to be in these woods." Harry blinked. Voldemort was gone, frightened away, and Firenze stood before him. I didn't think the centaurs liked me much, Harry said cautiously. You have read the article? Firenze asked. Yes, Harry answered. I thought that the centaurs thought that I'm going to be evil. No, 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 Firenze said mournfully, shaking his head. The article twisted my own words. Yes, it was my own words, though I never told a human. Harry Potter, do you know what is in the castle at this very moment? The Philosopher's Stone. Indeed, he said. Can you not think of anyone who would be so desperate as to kill a unicorn? That shadow. It was Lord Voldemort. Harry forced himself to sound surprised. It was. I read in the stars long ago that he who must not be named will rise again, Firenze told him. He is not dead, and he's coming for me, Harry said quietly. Come, get on my back. I will take you to Hagrid. Firenze knelt down so Harry could clamber on. He was far more mindful this time of the fact that it was quite unusual for a centaur to allow a human to ride him. Thank you for doing this, Harry said awkwardly once the centaur had slowed a bit, wanting to say something. It doesn't feel right, treating you like you're a regular horse. He is right, Firenze, came a low, angry voice. Two centaurs stepped out of the shadows. Harry immediately slid off Firenze's back. He is a fool, and he is wiser than you. Firenze flared up at once. Do you know who this child is? This is Harry Potter, and he was nearly killed tonight by he who must not be named. You should not set yourself against the stars, brother, the other centaurs said. Harry searched his memory until he came up with a name, Megorian, the doleful one. I do not set myself against the stars, Firenze argued. You know what is fated to happen. It is not for us to interfere. Through the prism of knowledge that Harry had not had the first time around, he realized something with a jolt. The centaurs knew. They knew that one day Harry would stand and take another killing curse at the hand of Voldemort. And they knew that the consequences of this not happening were dire. The continued existence of Voldemort and the threat of a world plunged in a darkness that could only be averted by Harry's death. He gazed up at the night sky and could barely see the stars twinkling through the thick foliage. Perhaps I haven't given Bane and Megorian enough credit, Harry thought ruefully. Maybe they don't know the fullness of the prophecy or the Horcrux inside of me, but they know more than I realized the last time. Harry Potter, listen to me, Firenze said in a low and urgent voice once Bane and Megorian had cantered deeper into the wood. It is not safe for you to be alone in these woods. I realize that now, Harry said quietly. Thank you again for carrying me, and thanks for stopping Voldemort from killing me. Firenze stared at him with such unnerving intensity that Harry began to wonder what else the stars had told the centaurs. But the arrival of Hagrid and the others broke the spell, and Harry never had a chance to ask him. Harry was up early the next morning, despite his lack of sleep. He put on his school robes, grabbed his wand and book bag, and trotted down the stairs. The common room was completely empty, so he threw himself down onto the most comfortable armchair. The house elves had tended the fire, and it crackled merrily in the hearth. Looking at it, Harry suddenly wished that he could speak to Sirius. But Sirius was still in Azkaban, and would still be there for some time yet. Guilt welled up inside him. Harry, Neville's voice. Yeah. Harry tipped his head back to smile at the pudgy boy. Are you all right? After last night, I'm fine, he said. Well, Neville looked as though he did not believe Harry. But to Harry's relief, Neville chose not to push it. Do you want to study for the Transfiguration exam? Only if you help me with herbology. Perhaps half an hour passed, while Harry quizzed Neville on transfiguring inanimate objects into other inanimate objects. Neville, in turn, had a wealth of knowledge when it came to the first-year plants they were required to know. Don't tell anyone. Professor Sprout wants it kept a secret, but we're getting mandrakes next year. Neville whispered, his face alight with excitement. You know a lot about plants, Harry pointed out needlessly. A flush brightened Neville's face until it was the exact same shade of the armchair upon which he sat. I spent a lot of time in the greenhouses last term. I like plants. They remind me of being at my Uncle Algy's house. He owns a greenhouse in Bristol, and I went and visited him last summer before school started. That's when I got Trevor, I found him in one of the plants, and Uncle Algie let me keep him. Anyway, Professor Sprout doesn't mind if I come visit. She's really nice." Harry agreed. "Do you still go there?" he asked curiously. "I haven't noticed it." Neville's face grew even redder, which Harry had not thought possible. "I haven't needed to. I mean, we've been hanging out a lot." Harry's stomach tightened when he realized how lonely Neville must have been. Now he thought of it. He realized that Neville had always been on the periphery of various friendships. In the boys' dormitory, it had always been Dean Thomas and Seamus Finnegan, and Harry and Ron. Neville was the odd one out, the one without a best mate sleeping in a bed near him. It had not been until Dumbledore's army that he had made abiding friendships, the closest with Luna Lovegood and later with Hannah Abbott. "We'll have to go down with you sometimes," Harry said casually. "We could use a break from the other students." Hermione and Ron came down at the exact same moment. Harry wondered, not for the first time, if Ron had some sort of sixth sense when it came to Hermione's whereabouts. "Excuse me a moment, Neville," Harry murmured. He strode over to them, bent his head, and told them, with a few minor adjustments, what had happened the previous evening in the Forbidden Forest. "It's Voldemort," he finished. "That's who's trying to steal the Philosopher's Stone." Harry and Ron snuck out of the boys' dormitory without incident. Harry could not help but glance over at Neville's bed, wondering if he would try to stop them again. Neville had taken to disappearing for a few hours every other day or so. Harry was curious about it, but he figured that Neville was visiting the greenhouses and Professor Sprout again. Still, it had allowed him, Ron, and Hermione the chance to discover Hagrid's careless talk in the Hog's Head Inn. The crimson hangings, however, were closed, and Harry could not tell. Hermione met them at the foot of the stairs, and Harry's heart immediately started pumping especially fast. This was the moment. It was time to rescue the stone and pass the first hurdle in the journey toward Voldemort's eventual defeat. "Have you got the cloak?" Hermione's hiss betrayed her nerves. It was much louder than her speaking voice. "Yeah," Ron assured her. "Let's go," Harry said. "You three are going out again," Neville's voice. The pudgy boy peeked over the top of the armchair. "Neville," Hermione said despairingly. "Listen, go back to bed. This is important." "No," the boy flushed. "I know what you're up to." Ron and Harry exchanged surprised looks. "I heard Harry telling you after our detention." Neville set his jaw, and Harry saw, for the first time, the resemblance between the shy boy he was and the courageous man he would become. "I'm not deaf. I was sitting right there." "Neville, I want to come with you," he said stubbornly. "I want to help stop you-know-who. If you don't let me, I'll—" "All right," Harry said firmly, before Neville could threaten to fight them. "It'll be a tight fit under the cloak, but I think it'll cover us. We need all the help we can get against Voldemort," he explained, mostly for Hermione's benefit. "Can we go now?" They marched to the portrait hole, and Harry heard Hermione say, "Are you sure, Neville? It will be very dangerous." Neville didn't answer, but continued on. Once they were out, he threw the cloak over himself and the other three. It covered them, barely. Ron had to hunch down a little to keep their feet from showing, but they could manage. "Listen," Harry said softly for Neville's benefit. "Do you know what the Philosopher's Stone is?" "Yeah," Neville said just as quietly. Harry could barely hear him. "Ever since I eavesdropped, I've been researching it in the library. We've got to stop him from getting it." "Well done, Neville," Hermione said. "There's stuff guarding it." "We only know one of them," Ron lied. "It's a three-headed dog." Harry cursed. It came out louder than he had expected. "I forgot the flute. Damn it. We can't go back now," Hermione said in horror. "Don't worry, we'll just sing," Ron said. "Three-headed dog?" Neville said faintly. Harry had forgotten that this Neville had never encountered Fluffy before. "Yeah, his name is Fluffy," Ron told him. "But you just got to make music, and he goes right to sleep." "Which Hagrid told, Hermione explained. She paused while they tiptoed past Mrs. Norris. When she was about to continue, Harry gripped her arm. "Peeves," he breathed. Once he had tricked Peeves into thinking that he was the bloody Baronoff on secret business, he continued where Hermione left off. "We're certain that Voldemort," everyone flinched, even Ron, "is using a teacher." "Who?" Neville's eyes were round with shock. "I think it's Snape," Hermione said stubbornly. It isn't Snape, Ron said exasperatedly. Look, Harry and I have spent loads of time with him in detention. He could have killed Harry at any time. True, Hermione said grudgingly. Me and Ron reckon Quirrell's behind everything, Harry said. They paused outside the door leading to the third-floor corridor where Fluffy, Professor Quirrell, and Voldemort awaited them. I think I agree with Hermione, Neville said timidly. Quirrell's afraid of even more things than I am. Ron snorted. You're heading off to face you-know-who with 3 other first years, and you think you're a coward or something? Hermione muffled a squeak. Apparently having it put that baldly stretched her nerves. Harry told Neville about the lack of stuttering that he'd lied about overhearing. Listen, we can't waste any more time. We've got to go. They stepped into the room with Fluffy. Hi, Fluffy, said Ron, and immediately began to sing a rather awful rendition of the Hogwarts song. After a moment's pause, Harry's singing voice was, if possible, even worse than Ron's. Harry joined in. He used the tune of an old Muggle song. Hermione followed their lead, and then Neville did, his voice thin and shaking. It worked. It probably worked even better than the last time. The monstrous dog flopped down, sighed deeply from all 3 mouths, and closed its 6 eyes. Harry moved forward, shoved an enormous paw off of the trapdoor, and opened it. Listen, he said, while the others kept singing. I'll go down first, then Ron, then Neville, then you, Hermione. They nodded, and Harry jumped. Down and down he fell, landing with a thump on the devil's snare. Ron quickly followed, grinning. Harry answered it. Neville screamed all the way down. Neville, Harry said urgently. What's this plant thing? Ron and I can't move. Neville looked around, eyes narrowed. It's devil's snare. It fears fire. Oh no, I can't move my hand. Hermione landed beside them, looking frightened. Hermione, make fire. Neville shouted at her. Hurry, wand trembling in her grasp. She muttered the spell for the bluebell flames she knew so well. Within moments, they were free. Good thinking, Neville. Ron clapped him on the back. Yes, Hermione said shakily. It's lucky you're here. Come on, Harry said grimly. We don't know what's up ahead, he lied. They entered the room with the flying keys. Harry looked around for the one with the bent wing, grabbed the broom that rested up against the wall, and tore off after it. He followed it around and around the room, grimacing whenever he collided with a small, sharp object, and finally closed his fingers around it. Hermione's and Neville's mouths were open in an O, and they stared at Harry as if they had never seen him before. Wow, Harry, where'd you learn to fly like that? Neville asked. You should sign up for the Quidditch team. Yeah, I'll go do that right now, Harry said sarcastically. Ron's been telling me that for months, but they don't allow first years on the team, do they? Harry and I did some flying at the Burrow over Christmas, Ron explained, while Harry fitted the key in the lock and opened the door that led to the unconscious troll. At least we don't have to fight the troll, Neville stared at it. Ron and Harry wouldn't have a problem with it, Hermione informed him. Ron beamed. The next room had the gigantic, moving chess set, and Harry was just as lost as before. Ron, however, was clearly in his element. He made all the calls, and Harry, Hermione, and Neville followed his orders, looking relieved. Not only that, but Ron managed not only to get them across the board in half the time, but he didn't get himself hurt in the process. Good job, mate, Harry said. Thanks, Ron smiled, not at all modest, and led the way across the threshold of the last room. It took Hermione 4 minutes to figure out the logic puzzle. Harry timed it. His anxiety grew steadily. This was it. Voldemort was in the next room. He glanced at Ron, who gave him a wordless look of reassurance. Neville looked green, though he held his hat up, and then Harry looked at Hermione. Her mouth moved soundlessly as she puzzled through Snape's test. The black flames behind her flickered and gave the room an eerie glow. She looked up, triumphant, just as Harry pulled her away. For a moment, she had looked like she was on fire, the flames licking up her robes, lighting her bushy hair, and Harry could hear the echoes of her agonized screams. Harry, what are you doing? She cried out. Harry had yanked her, hard, away from the flames that seemed even more ominous than they had the last time. She nearly fell, but she caught herself on Ron's robes. I'm sorry, Harry muttered, panting. I just thought. You look like you were on fire. Well, I'm not, she said testily. But I figured out which one will send us through. It's the little one on the end. She pointed. Harry picked it up with fingers that still trembled. He could not look at Ron. There's only enough for one, he said. His back still turned. He focused his attention on the obfuscamancy he had practiced nearly every day for months. It was as good as he could make it, and that would have to do. Listen, he said. Go back up. Use the brooms in the room with the keys. Send Hedwig to find Dumbledore. We can't let you go alone. Neville said. You know who is there. Find Dumbledore, Harry said, and even he could hear the finality in his voice. Tell him everything you know. He tipped the last of the potion into his mouth, swallowed, and stepped through the flames. Quirrell stood in front of the mirror of Ariste, his back turned, and that ridiculous purple turban still on his head. Ah, Potter, he turned. I wondered if I would meet you down here. I'm not going to let you have the stone, Harry told him. Quirrell trained his wand on him. And I expect you've run into a bit of a problem with Dumbledore's test, haven't you? You can't get the stone, can you? Not yet, but I will, Quirrell cackled. And I will be rewarded beyond imagining, shared power and glory, more than I could ever dream. If you get the stone, Harry pointed out. How long have you been down here? He wiped his sweaty palms against his robes. Use the boy, Voldemort hissed from behind the turban. Harry's scar burned, but he ignored it. Potter, come here. Harry took his time. He did not know how long it would take Dumbledore, who was poised to meet Ron, Neville, and Hermione halfway to the Ollery, to get here. He'd barely survived the effort last time. He'll get here in time, Harry told himself. Stand in front of the mirror and tell me what you see. Quirrell nudged him in the back. Do it. What? No, please. Harry muttered, earning himself a shove that sent him to his knees. Quirrell gave the there is no good and evil, only power speech again, evidently unable to help himself. Harry listened carefully, though it made him feel ill. Voldemort is wrong about that, dead wrong, he thought, grimly satisfied. When Harry could stall no longer, he moved to stand before the mirror. For a moment, it only gave him his reflection, short, skinny, and pale, before it changed. It flickered. It showed him with Ginny, his arm around her, smiling broadly. Ron and Hermione stood next to them. Harry looked closer and saw all the Weasleys, Hagrid, Neville, Luna, and many more familiar faces, all happy and alive, and all mouthing the words, "You did it!" Then it faded away, and he saw his parents and all his family. I've still got that desire. Then, Harry thought a little wistfully. It too faded. He saw himself winking slyly and patting the pocket of his robes. He felt the stone drop into his pocket. What did you see, Potter? Harry closed his eyes and very carefully rearranged his memories to fit the old timeline. He turned. I saw myself, standing and holding the Quidditch cup and the house cup. I've just won both, he lied. He felt the faintest touch on his mind. Voldemort was truly an accomplished legilimens. Snape felt like a battering ram, and countered it with obfuscamancy. Voldemort was only there for a moment. Harry was relieved to note. He had not suspected a thing, and left as soon as he saw that Harry had the stone. He lies. Harry ran for the stairs. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, and the 4th and 5th, and he was almost halfway there before Quirrell caught him. He grabbed him by the hair, touching Harry's skin, and sealed his own fate in the process. They both looked down, almost fascinated and unable to look away, when Quirrell's hand started to smolder. It blackened and charred and turned to ash before Quirrell could move away. Harry reached up and touched the man who had consented to let Voldemort share his soul. Quirrell screamed in agony and fright, and little black stars began to dance in front of Harry's eyes. Still, Harry kept his hand on Quirrell's face and reached to grab Quirrell's wand arm. The man stopped screaming just before the darkness claimed Harry. HP, 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 HP. Harry eased back into wakefulness slowly, as though slipping into a warm bath. Harry waited several moments, collecting his thoughts, before attempting to open his eyes. His limbs felt heavy and his head muddled. He blinked, seeing only brightness and the blurry gold of Dumbledore's glasses. Voldemort, Harry murmured. Fled, Dumbledore told him succinctly. You almost died again. I know, but I knew I wouldn't. It was extremely close. For a terrible moment, I thought you'd been killed. You said that last time, Harry replied. What if I'd been just a moment too slow? Dumbledore asked. Harry wondered vaguely if the older wizard was angry with him. What if your friends had not gotten to me as fast as they did? I knew they wouldn't. Harry, the future isn't immutable. You have proven that. I noticed Mr. Longbottom was there as well. What if he had changed something? Dumbledore sounded very weary. Despite the fact that you've been here before, have done these things before, does not mean that things won't change. The reason why I'm here is to change things, Harry reminded him. And I didn't know that you would arrive when you did, or that my friends would be as fast as they were, because I know the future and how things turn out. I knew because I trusted you to get there in time, and I trusted them to run as fast as they could. He was so tired. How long have I been here? Less than a day, said Dumbledore. There was a note in his voice that Harry could not define. I'm awake earlier than last time, Harry said. Must be why I can barely think. Or keep my eyes open. I suspect Madame Pomfrey will want to keep you for several days, Dumbledore said. You've exhausted almost all of your energy. Not all of it, Harry pointed out. He sounded very weak, and it was a little humiliating. He closed his eyes. Harry, I worry that, given the circumstances, Dumbledore began delicately. For a moment, Harry was confused. What circumstances? But then he remembered. The Horcrux inside him and the killing curse. Voldemort and the death that likely lay in his future. I fear that you're taking risks with your life. Am not, promise. Harry forced the words out. He felt like he was being smothered in cotton as soft as clouds, and he wanted to give in to the feeling. Not worried about that yet. Things I've got to do. If you say so, Dumbledore sighed. Harry didn't know if the man believed him or not, but it was true for now. He didn't want to dwell on it. He had years and years. Professor, last time, Hagrid sent owls to get pictures of my parents' old school friends. I will ensure that he does it again, said Dumbledore. Regardless of your words, Harry, I'm still worried. I did not like to see you so near to death as I did last night. You'll get used to it. Harry's words were so slurred that he was not sure Dumbledore had understood them. Harry smiled a little and let himself fade away, grateful, despite Dumbledore's concerns, to be alive.